morning, ladies and gentlemen. In this session, we will talk about customs valuation and transfer pricing. So transfer pricing, this is a very hot topic nowadays. I think maybe some of the participants have already have some ideas, but maybe some of them have no ideas yet. So at the first beginning, I'd like to give a definition of the transfer pricing. What is transfer pricing? Transfer pricing is a term used to describe how multinational enterprises set price for the transfer of property, goods, or service between or within their related companies. So this is transfer pricing. Transfer pricing. This is how multinational companies, how these companies set their price, set the price of the transactions between related companies. And as a result of this transfer pricing, we got a price set for these properties, goods, and services. This price, we call it transfer price. So transfer pricing, and we got transfer price. Here is a diagram to show the relationships between different members of a multinational group. And for a multinational group, we may have headquarters on the top, and we may have a manufacturer on the right side, and we may have distributors, and we may have service companies on the right side of these slides. And these companies, they all belong to the same group, but they may be located in different countries, which means they have to pay revenues or duties to different tax authorities and customs. So there may be all kinds of transactions between the members of the same group. For example, the headquarters, they may sell some intellectual properties to the manufacturer. For example, trademarks, patents. They sell these trademarks or patents or transfer these patents or trademark to the manufacturer for the production. And the manufacturer, after the production of the goods, they transfer this finished product to the distributor to sell them in the market. And during this process, the service company may provide service for other members of the group. For example, for the distributors, the service provided by the company may include market investigation, advertising, insurance. Of course, these service companies can provide all kinds of service to other members of the group, to the headquarters, to the manufacturers. So in doing their business, this multinational group could develop a transfer pricing policy to set the price for these transactions between the headquarters and the subsidiaries, or between the different subsidiaries. So the transfer pricing is an everyday business practice in international trade. You can see it from this diagram. And why transfer pricing is so important? Why transfer pricing is a very hot topic nowadays? First, the sales within multinational enterprises account for over 60% of the international trade. So it's already an everyday practice. Second, transfer pricing could be used to shift profit to low tax jurisdictions, because the transfer price is set inside the group, not in the open market. So the multinational companies may benefit by the transfer price, by deliberately increase or decrease the price of imported goods in order to take advantage of the most favorable tax or duty rate. For example, by lower the declared custom value of imported goods, the multinational company pay less customs duties. But on the other hand, if the importing country's customs duty rate are lower than its corporate tax rates, an overvaluation of the imported goods might occur to get an overall tax liability advantage for the whole group. So if applied according to the rules, transfer pricing could be legal activities, but unfortunately, sometimes it could be abused. That's why OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they have a specific program called BEPS, BEPS, Basic Erosion and Profit Shifting Program, just to prevent the abuse of transfer pricing for tax avoidance purposes. So this is why this transfer pricing topic is very important nowadays. And just now we mentioned, if applied according to the rules, the transfer pricing is a legal activity. So what kind of rules we are talking about? Is there any international rules specifically for transfer pricing? Yes, we have. OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has provided an international standard. OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines is an international standard for direct taxation authorities. Actually, nowadays it's used by most tax authorities in the world, not just limited to OECD members. For these guidelines, OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines, the basic principle is arm's length principle. Arm's length principle is the basic principle for this OECD guidelines. So what is arm's length principle? Arm's length principle. So you see, the main problem for the transfer pricing is the parties involved in a single transaction, they are related with each other. They are all members of the same group. They receive orders from the same headquarters. So this relationship between different parties involved in one transaction may affect the price of the transaction. So this is the main problems of transfer pricing. So arm's length means that the parties involved in one transaction should keep distance with each other. Keep 1 arm's distance with each other. That means although you are related with your business partner, you have a very good relationship with your business partner, but when it comes to business, when it comes to the price, you should keep distance with him. You should keep distance with your business partners to make sure that the price is settled just as both of your parties are not related. So keep reasonable distance with your business partners when setting the price. So this is the arm's length principle, reasonable distance. So this OECD transfer pricing guidelines are first issued in the year 1979, and there are some substantially revisions in the year 1995 and 2009. The latest edition was released in the year 2017. You can find these guidelines on the website of OECD. It's free. So just now we introduced the OECD guidelines on transfer pricing, but how about custom valuation? Could we find any specific terms or provisions in the agreement, in the WTO custom valuation agreement, deals with transfer pricing? Actually, you cannot find this word, transfer pricing or transfer price, in the agreement. But to deal with transfer pricing, in the agreement, we have some provisions about related parties. I think you have learned that whenever possible, according to the agreement, whenever possible, the custom value should be the transaction value of the goods being valued. That is the price actually paid or payable for the goods when sold for export to the country of import. And you may notice that there are some certain conditions listed in Article 1 of the agreement. The transaction value is subject to four conditions. And one of the conditions is the buyer and the seller are not related, or where the buyer and the seller are related. The relationship do not actually influence the price. So the question is, when customs find the buyer and the seller are related. For example, they are all subsidiaries of the same multinational group. So how to determine the price? Obviously, the transfer price is influenced by the relationship or not. Whether this transfer price is acceptable to customers or not. And in the agreement, we have some provisions to deal with this situation. For example, Article 1.2. In determining whether the transaction value is acceptable, the fact that the buyer and the seller are related within the meaning of Article 15 shall not in itself be grounds for regarding the transaction value as unacceptable. Which means even if you find the buyer and the seller, they are all subsidiaries of the same group, they are related, you cannot just reject the transfer price because they are related. You cannot do that. In such cases, the circumstance surrounding the sale should be examined, and the transaction value should be accepted, provided that the relationship did not influence the price. So in this situation, what could we do? What kind of information will we need to make certain that the influence, the relationship do not influence the price? We examine the circumstance surrounding the sale. Examine the circumstance surrounding the sale. And how to do it? How to examine the circumstance surrounding the sale? There are two examples in the agreement. First, actually there are two questions we ask ourselves. Has price been settled? Has this transfer price is settled in a manner consistent with the normal pricing practice of the industry in question, or with the way the seller settles price for sales to buyers who are not related to the seller? So this is the question. So the question we ask ourselves, do these parties involved in the transaction keep enough distance with each other when it comes to business, when it comes to the price, and whether the price is settled just as the buyer and the seller, they are not related. They are not related. Sounds very familiar, right? Yes, it's very similar to the arm's length principle in the OECD guidelines. And the second example, is price adequate to ensure recovery of all costs plus a profit, which is representative of the firm's overall profit realized over a period of time. So is the transfer price high enough to cover all the costs and the profit of the involved parties? So this is the question. These two questions we ask ourselves, and we are trying to collect information to answer these questions. This is the examination of circumstance of the sale. of the sale. And in the agreement, there is another way to make certain whether there is influence on the price or not. It's test values under Article 1.2. In a sale between related persons, the transaction value should be accepted when the importer demonstrates that such values, the following values, are closely approximate to the declared value. What kind of test values we have? First one, the transaction value in sales to unrelated buyer of identical or similar goods. The second one, the custom value of identical or similar goods as determined under the provisions of Article 5. Determined under Article 5 with the deductive method. And the third, the custom values of identical or similar goods as determined under the provisions of Article 6 with the computed value method. So these test values, when we use these test values, actually we are make a comparison of the declared price or the transfer price of the imported goods with the relevant custom value of identical or similar goods shipment, where the buyer and the seller are not related. We make some comparison. And if we could find the transfer price and the test value, they are close enough to each other, we can see there is no influence. Although the buyer and the seller are related, there is no influence of the relationship on the price. Therefore, this declared price, this transfer price is acceptable to customs. So just now we mentioned, you may notice that there are some similarities between the OECD rules and the WTO valuation rules, the arm's length principle, keep reasonable distance, and we have the same kind of provisions in the WTO agreement. You should settle the price just as you are not related. So if we make a detailed comparison between these two methodologies, OECD rules and the WTO valuation rules, actually we will find more similarities. It had been pointed out, for example, it had been pointed out there is so many similarities. For example, for the OECD rules, in the OECD guidelines, we have several methods. This method, the multinational companies could be used to settle the transfer price. We have comparable uncontrolled price, CUP method. We have a resale price method. We have cost plus method. We have a transactional net margin method, TNMM, and we have profit split method in the OECD guidelines. And when we come to the WTO valuation agreement, of course, the Article 1, the transaction value should be applied in the first place to the greatest extent. And besides the transaction value method, we have some other method stipulated in Article 2 to Article 7. We have identical and similar goods method. We have a deductive value method, computed value method, and the fallback method. If you pay attention to the deductive method, Article 5. Under Article 5, the custom value is determined. The custom value is based on the resale price of the goods, and it's very similar to the resale price method in the OECD guidelines. And another example is Article 6. Article 6, computed value method. Computed value method. The computed value method is based on a value built up from materials and manufacturing costs plus profit. It's very similar to the OECD cost plus method. So the traders may say, okay, that is a very good news for us. There's two sets of rules, and there is so many similarities. Maybe we could consider combine these rules together, OECD guidelines, OECD rules, and WTO rules. Maybe we can combine these two sets of rules. So it could provide more convenience for the traders. But actually, despite there is a lot of similarities, there are very important difference between these two rules, OECD guidelines and WTO agreements. First, when we talk about customs valuation, customs in most cases deals with imported goods, tangibles only. So transaction value is the price paid or payable for the imported goods, for the imported tangibles. And the custom value of each shipment, each transaction needed to be determined separately for customs. And normally the custom value is settled at the point of importation. But for transfer pricing, it's different. Transfer pricing could cover the transaction of goods, service, and intellectual properties, and the transfer price could be adjusted time to time in a financial year. So it's not necessary to set a price for each single transaction. So it's the difference between custom valuation and the transfer pricing. And if we come to the rules, the OECD guidelines and the WTO custom valuation agreement, there is some key difference. For customs focus is on transaction value method, Article 1, and whether or not the declared price had been influenced when buyer and seller are related. Therefore, customs examined transfer pricing data in this context, and other WTO method under Article 2 to Article 7. This method we call it alternative method. This method can only be used when the transaction value method cannot apply. But for OECD guidelines, the multinational companies can use any of the method in these guidelines to prove that the transfer price is settled with arm's length principle. So because of the difference between these two set of rules, sometimes the importer, especially the importer who had to declare to both customs and the tax authority, they found themselves between rock and hard places. Sometimes customs may consider that the price of the imported goods is too low, but the tax authority thinks it's too high, because as a result, the profit in the imported country will be lower than expected. So the question is there any possibility? There is a gap. We found there is a gap between these two set of rules. So is there any possibility to fill the gap in order to provide more certainty and transparency to the trader? Actually, yes. Commentary 23.1. Examination of the expression circumstance surrounding the sale under Article 1.2a in relation to the use of transfer pricing studies. So this is the first instrument adopted by the TCCV, Technical Committee on Custom Valuation, to refer to transfer pricing. So we already know that TP report, or sometimes we call it transfer pricing studies, will be prepared and submitted by the multinational company to tax authorities to prove that the price is settled with one of the OECD method. So there are a lot of information, useful information in this transfer pricing report. So the question is, could this information be used by customs, not limited to the tax authority? And the commentary 23.1 gives answer to this question. So still remember the how we make certain in related party transactions, how customs make certain whether the relationship impact the price or not. There are several methods, two methods actually. Test value, if they could provide it by the importer. And if there's no test value, we could come to examination of circumstance surrounding the sale. And when we examine the circumstance surrounding the sale, we asked ourselves two questions. First is, has the price been settled in a manner consistent with the normal pricing practice of the industry? Or we can see, did the buyer and the seller keep reasonable distance between each other when they settled the price? And the second one, is price adequate to ensure recovery of all cost and profit? So these two questions, and the customers will collect all kinds of information to answer these two questions. So in commentary 23.1, it states that any relevant information and documents provided may be utilized for examining the circumstance of the sale. And a transfer pricing study could be one source of such information, which means when customs collecting information to answer the two questions, the information in the TP study could be taken into consideration. So through this instrument, this commentary 23.1 tries to establish the linkage between these two rules, OECD rules, TP study, and the WTO custom valuation agreement. So, but because there is gaps between these two rules, it also states in the instrument that the use of a transfer pricing study as a possible base should be considered on a case-by-case basis, which means even if this transfer pricing study, transfer pricing report has been accepted by the tax authority, the customs will not necessarily accept it. So it should be considered on a case-by-case basis. So this instrument is the first step to fill the gap between the custom valuation rules, and the OECD guidelines. But I think there will still be more questions about this instrument, because it's stated in the instrument that the TP study could be taken into consideration, but it should be considered on a case-by-case basis. So how to apply this instrument in a specific case? Could you show us an example? Yes, I think the same question arises from the delegate of the technical committee, and the technical committee finally adopted another instrument, case study 14.1, just to show the application of commentary 23.1 in a real case. Here is the scenario of this case study 14.1. XCO of country X sells relays to its wholly owned subsidiaries ICO. ICO is a distributor of country I. ICO is a distributor of country I. So ICO imports relays and does not purchase any product from unrelated sellers. And XCO does not sell relays or goods of the same class or kind to unrelated buyers. So there is no identical or similar goods. And the buyer and the seller, they are related. And because they are related, the customs, because have doubt about the acceptability of the price, reveal the circumstances surrounding the sale. And in response to customer request, ICO submit a transfer pricing study prepared by an independent accounting firm. In this TP study, the importer used one of the method of the OECD guideline, TNMM, transactional net margin method. In this method, ICO is a distributor, and ICO has an operating margin. So with this method, TNMM, we make a comparison between ICO's operating margin with other distributors' operating margin in order to determine whether the price of the imported goods, the transfer price of the imported goods, is acceptable or not. And what kind of information? Because customers already know from the commentary 23.1 that this information in the transfer pricing study could be taken into account by customs. So what kind of information customs found in this TP studies? Information concerning 8 unrelated distributors found for comparison. So they found 8 other unrelated distributors in the country I for comparison purposes. And the functional analysis shows that risks assumed by ICO was similar to this assumed by these 8 distributors. So they play the similar functions. And how about the operating margins? Because we want to make a comparison between the operating margins of the ICO and the other distributors. For these 8 unrelated distributors, the operating margin, the lowest is 0.64. The highest is 2.79. The average is 1.93. And the margin of the ICO, the operating margin of ICO is 2.5%. So this operating margin, or this method, TNMM, this TP report has been accepted by tax authorities. So here is the scenario. We have a buyer, we have a seller. They are related. They are related parties. And there is no test value, as there are no similar goods or identical goods. But in the TP report, we found some information. They use the TNMM method, make a comparison between the ICO and other distributors who play the similar function in the country of importation. And the range of operating information is from 0.6 to 2.7, while the operating margin of the ICO is 2.5%. And we know that this TP report has been accepted by tax authorities. It's acceptable for tax authorities because the price is settled with one of the methods mentioned in the OECD guidelines. But for customs, the commentary 23.1 has mentioned the use of the TP report should be based on also be considered on a case-by-case basis. So this is the scenario. This TP report should they also acceptable? Should it also be acceptable to customs? So this is the question. Should this TP studies be used to ascertain whether the transaction value of the imported goods is not influenced by the relationship of the parties under Article 1 of the agreement? Because we have mentioned the difference between WTO rules and the OECD rules. For OECD rules, the multinational companies can use any of this method in the guidelines to prove that the price is settled with arm's length principle. But for customs, we focused on the transaction value. We want to make certain when the party, the buyer and the seller, they are related. is this relationship has influenced on the price of the imported goods, and we collect information for this purpose. So next we will come to the analysis and conclusions of the technical committee. Actually, this analysis is rather long, but I think it's very useful. It's very useful. It could be used to show how customs deals with related party transactions. So here is the analysis of the technical committee. XCO and the ICO, they are related. XCO does not sell the goods to unrelated buyers, and ICO is unable to show that the price was settled in the same manner as in sale to unrelated parties. And there is no test value available to the importer. So we have to come to first method, examination of the circumstance surrounding the sale. And when we come back to the agreement, it states that the customs administrations should be prepared to examine relevant aspects of the transaction, including the way in which the buyer and the seller organize their commercial relations, and the way in which the price in question was arrived at, in order to determine whether the relationship influenced the price. So the customs considered whether the examination of the external comparables discussed in the transfer pricing studies could be regarded as being consistent with the process of examining the normal industry pricing practice. So when we considered whether the price is settled between related parties, just as these two parties are not related, we can use information from the TP studies. And what kind of information we get from these TP studies? Functional analysis shows that there is no significant difference in functions, risks, and assets between ICO and the other 8 unrelated distributors. And we also find this information. An adequate level of product comparability was observed, and the operating margin on resale of the imported goods was generally the same as in the industry in question. And the TP study found that arm's length range of comparable companies' operating margin was between 0.6 and 2.7, while ICO's margin is 2.5. So as all companies sell goods of the same class or kinds, although they are not the same product, but they are of the same class or kind, the TP studies are finding that the price between ICO and XCO was settled in a manner consistent with the normal pricing practice of the industry. This is the information customs find in the TP report. So by working back from the arm's length range of operating profit margin and the other accepted information set out above, it could be deduced that the transfer pricing is an arm's length amount, and this demonstrates that the information relating to the transaction between ICO and unrelated distributor can be helpful and relevant to customs when examining the circumstances surrounding the sale between XCO and ICO. So we found all kinds of information in the TP studies, and we found this information is very useful for customs to determine whether the price is settled according to the normal commercial practice. So with all the information, what's the conclusion? What's the conclusion of customs? After examination of the circumstances surrounding the sale, in respect of related party transactions between ICO and XCO, customs concluded, including by analysis of a transfer pricing study based on TNMM, customs come to a conclusion that the relationship between the parties did not influence the price. Customs draw this conclusion with the help of the information from the transfer pricing study. So also at the end of this case study, it emphasized that as indicated in commentary 23.1, the use of a transfer pricing study for examination, the circumstances surrounding the sale must be considered on a case-by-case basis, which means in this case, in case study 14.1, the TP studies are accepted by the tax authorities and is also accepted by customs. But it's not always the case. Maybe in some other cases, the TP reports are accepted for tax authorities, but for some certain reasons, customs could reject it, even if the transfer price are supported by the TP report, which used one of the method in the OECD guidelines, but the customs still have the right to rejected it. So this is the case study. This is the case study 14.1, just to show the application of commentary 23.1. And here we have a brief introduction of the customs valuation and transfer pricing. And we mentioned the rules under OECD rules and the WTO customs valuation and the difference between these two set of rules. And thanks for your listening. And I'm very glad to answer your questions. Thank you.
Pendant la présentation. Et maintenant, on va commencer par une question. We are starting for one question for the transfer price. We have a multinational company that import the goods from the mother company. So the mother company sends the goods to the branch. The price is only for the cost of the goods without any profits, trademarks value, and other costs. It just has the cost of the manufacturing. So what do you think about the value for custom?
La question porte sur la situation relative au prix de transfert dans le contexte d'une entreprise multinationale. Il s'agit d'une entreprise, d'une maison mère qui envoie des produits, des marchandises à sa filiale. Donc la filiale importe et elle importe au coût où sont fabriquées ces marchandises. Donc seul le coût de la fabrication est pris en considération pour le paiement de la filiale à la maison mère. Que faut-il en penser sur le plan de la douane?
Hello everyone. Hello Yara. Thank you for this question. I think if I am the customs officer of the importing country, I will find this transaction or this declared price is abnormal, because according to commercial practice, if a seller sells some goods to the buyer, the purpose is to make some profit for himself. If the price only included the cost of the goods without any profit, it looks strange to me. At least to me, it's very strange. But what I want to say is it's not definitely means customs should reject this price directly. Maybe there are some reason behind this, because in commercial practice, everything could happen. There may be some special reason, but a reasonable reason behind this arrangement. So if I'm a customs officer, I will put my questions to the importer, asking the importer to explain why this price is lower than the identical similar goods, or why the profit or maybe the transportation cost or the insurance cost is not included in the declared price.
Si je me place donc dans la peau d'un officier des douanes, je poserai des questions au pays d'importation, car en effet, le prix qui vient d'être mentionné est anormal. Selon les pratiques commerciales, il s'agit d'une situation anormale, puisque lorsqu'une vente intervient, en principe, il y a un bénéfice qui découle de la vente. Or, ici, apparemment, le coût payé par la filiale à la maison mère ne représentait pas ce bénéfice. Donc, la situation est étrange. Néanmoins, cela ne signifie pas pour autant que la douane puisse rejeter de manière unilatérale la proposition qui lui est soumise. Il peut y avoir une raison qui explique cette pratique commerciale anormale et donc je poserai en tant que douanier la question à l'importateur. Je lui demanderai d'expliquer pourquoi, par exemple, dans le prix, il n'a pas été tenu compte de l'assurance et d'autres frais. Merci.
Thank you very much, Jevin, for clarifying that customs needs to examine the entire situation with the company. Merci pour clarifier que la douane doit poursuivre une clarification, une explication chez la compagnie. We have another question. It's about your opinion on how artificial intelligence can assist customs administrations with transfer pricing fraud.
La question suivante que je voudrais vous poser est la suivante. La question consiste à savoir comment l'intelligence artificielle peut-elle aider les douanes à détecter des fraudes en matière de prix de transfert. Merci.
Thank you. Yes, according to my understanding, all these technologies like AI, like big data, blockchain chains could be very useful for customs in all aspects, not just limited to verification of the transfer pricing case, but to all the other aspects of duty collection, like harmonized system and origin.
Alors, merci beaucoup de cette question. Alors, d'après mes connaissances, toutes les nouvelles technologies, qu'il s'agisse d'intelligence artificielle ou de chaînes de blocs, par exemple, peuvent être très utiles pour les douanes, pas seulement dans le contexte d'une détection de fraude au prix de transfert, mais aussi pour améliorer donc, les recettes, aussi dans le domaine, par exemple, de l'origine et dans d'autres domaines. Merci.
Yes, from a customs valuation perspective, I think this technical especially useful. You see, the basic problems for customs valuation is customs officers. They want to establish a transaction value based on the truth and the accuracy of the declared price, but sometimes they do not have enough information to support their conclusion. So they have to collect this information themselves or ask the importer to provide more information.
Alors, je voudrais dire que le problème vu sous l'angle de la valeur en douane est que certainement ces nouvelles technologies peuvent être très utiles, mais le problème qui se pose plus particulièrement concerne directement les officiers de douane qui essayent sur base de faits réels, tangibles, sur base de faits véridiques et de précision, d'établir quel est le réel prix de transfert. Et parfois, les responsables de douane n'ont pas suffisamment d'informations. Ils vont peut-être devoir les rechercher eux-mêmes ou essayer d'obtenir des renseignements par des tiers. Merci.
Yes, so with the support of AI, big data, or blockchain chains, maybe we can make some get some results of the information we have at hand automatically. So customs will spend less time in verification of the truth or accuracy of the declaration. So it will enhance the efficiency of the customs clearance. Thank you.
Effectivement, l'intelligence artificielle, les chaînes de blocs, par exemple, vont pouvoir permettre aux douanes de vérifier de manière un peu plus automatisée certaines informations. Cela permettra aux douanes d'avoir plus de temps aussi, donc de vérifier la déclaration douane et l'authenticité des informations qui lui sont communiquées. Merci.
Thank you very much, Jabin, for your response. We have a question, another one. If the transactional value is being used, is accepted, and is being used in the related parties' transactions, should customs accept the change on the declared customs value of the imported goods as the result of the transfer pricing adjustments, either upward or downwards? If the answer is yes, what's the reason for that?
Si l'interprète a bien compris la question, il s'agit d'une situation où la valeur transactionnelle a été acceptée. Il s'agit d'une opération entre entreprises liées. Il est question aussi d'une situation où la valeur transactionnelle a été revue à la hausse ou, en cas contraire, à la baisse. Si c'est le cas, quelles sont les raisons et comment la douane peut-elle apprécier la situation?
Yes, the adjustment after importation is a very important and a very interesting question, I'd like to say.
C'était une question en fait sur les ajustements après importation. C'est une question particulièrement pertinente.
And from the tax administration perspective and from customs valuation perspective, maybe the result could be different.
L'appréciation de la situation sera probablement différente selon qu'on se place sur le plan de l'évaluation en douane ou encore de l'opérateur ou de l'instance qui s'occupe du recouvrement des recettes.
And for tax administrations, I'd like to say it's very normal that especially in the case of transfer pricing, they can make adjustment after importation time to time. In a financial year or even longer period of time, sometimes they can make adjustments in 3 years, and it's still acceptable to tax administrations. But for customs, maybe it's another story.
L'administration fiscale autorise les ajustements. Habituellement, les ajustements se font dans le cadre de l'exercice ou alors sur une durée plus longue. Les ajustements peuvent être autorisés jusqu'à une période de 3 ans. Aucun problème au niveau de l'administration fiscale. Par contre, la situation est différente pour les douanes.
So in the WTO customs valuation agreement, it's not mentioned whether or not customs should accept this adjustment after importation. But actually, according to the basic principles of the agreement, WCO, we encouraged customs to accept this adjustment after importation. Actually, the TCCV, Technical Committee on Custom Valuation, we have the entrustment just for this case. In that statement, the TCCV is of the will that whether the adjustments after importation should be accepted is up to the national legislation of the country of importation.
Oui, donc vous savez que dans l'accord sur l'évaluation en douane de l'OMC, rien n'est dit sur le fait que les douanes doivent accepter ou non des ajustements qui seraient appliqués après l'importation des marchandises. Toutefois, nous savons que l'OMC encourage les douanes à accepter de tels ajustements ex post en quelque sorte. Alors, il faut savoir qu'au sein du CTED, le comité technique sur l'évaluation en douane de l'OMD, un tel cas est à l'examen et l'avis qui a été rendu par le CTED est que les ajustements après importation peuvent se faire cela peut être décidé spécifiquement par chaque pays et cela peut être inscrit dans leur législation.
To my experience, many members have adopted such regulations on accepting the adjustment of the importation, but with a time limitation. For some members, the importer could make adjustment after importation in 3 months. For some members, the time limitation is 6 months. But nevertheless, it's all up to the member country itself.
Comme je le disais précédemment, il incombe à chaque État de prendre des dispositions et d'inscrire cette possibilité donc de procéder à des ajustements après l'importation dans sa législation. Alors, à ma connaissance, plusieurs pays ont inscrit cela dans leur propre règlement, mais ils limitent l'autorisation dans le temps, parfois 3 mois, parfois 6 mois. Donc, cela incombe à chaque État de décider comment il règle l'ajustement après importation. Merci.
Thank you very much, Jiabing, for your very comprehensive response. So we have another question. In your own words, please explain how would you validate a transfer pricing between the seller and buyer or the multinational enterprises?
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the question?
Yes, sure. In your own words, please explain how would you validate a transfer pricing between the seller and buyer or the multinational enterprise.
Thank you. La question suivante concerne donc le fait d'expliquer comment il est possible de valider un prix de transfert entre un vendeur et un acheteur. Il s'agit d'une entreprise multinationale.
Yes, for this question, first I'd like to see there is no a unique solution which is suitable for all the scenarios.
Je commencerai par dire que pour répondre à votre question, il n'y a pas de solution unique qui s'applique à tous les scénarios.
We know in commercial practice, the situations can widely vary from each other. So just as the TCCV mentioned in commentary 25.1, the consideration or the determination of the transfer price, whether it's acceptable to customers, should be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Alors, dans la pratique commerciale, les situations sont multiples. J'ai déjà fait référence au comité technique de CTED, au commentaire 23.1 et au fait qu'il convient de considérer au cas par cas la situation concernant tel ou tel prix de transfert.
Thank you. Hope I answered this question.
J'ose espérer avoir répondu à votre question.
Thank you very much, Jiabing. We have plenty of questions. Another one. Could you please explain further about the key difference when sometimes the importer has to declare to both customs and tax authorities, and customs view is that the price may be declared as too low, and tax authorities may think that the price is too high. Basically, why this would happen?
La question suivante porte sur le fait de la différence principale qui peut se présenter lors d'une importation et lorsque l'importateur doit faire une déclaration à la fois aux douanes et à l'autorité fiscale. Les douanes vont peut-être considérer que le prix déclaré est trop bas alors que le fisc va considérer que le prix est trop élevé. Comment cela peut-il advenir et que faut-il faire?
Thank you for this question. Yes, I think for this is the situation confronted by many importers, or especially for the importers who had to make declaration to customs and the tax administrations at the same time.
C'est effectivement une question intéressante. C'est une situation à laquelle sont confrontés de nombreux importateurs qui doivent à la fois faire une déclaration aux douanes et à l'administration fiscale.
I think the first issue I want to address is WTO valuation agreement and the OECD guidelines. They are two different rules. So even if the basic fact of the case is the same, it's not necessarily that these two rules could lead to the if the same factor are considered under different rules, it not necessarily lead to the same conclusion.
Nous avons parlé de l'accord sur l'évaluation en douane de l'OMC et aussi des principes de l'OCDE. Et bien entendu, ces deux entités, ces deux corps de règles sont différents. Ainsi, par exemple, dans une situation où les faits sont les mêmes, sont identiques, les règles qui s'appliquent peuvent être différentes et par conséquent les conclusions également.
But it's also noticed by WCO and OECD the desire of the importers to get more certification and transparency before the importation, because they want to make the same declaration with the same transfer price to the customs and the tax administration.
Il est très important d'aboutir à une transparence importante avant l'importation afin de parvenir à la même déclaration et au même prix de transfert qui sont déclarés aux douanes d'une part et à l'administration fiscale d'autre part. C'est en tout cas l'objectif recherché conjointement par l'OMC et l'OCDE.
Because of the key differences I mentioned in the presentation, the key differences between these two rules, OECD guidelines and the WTO agreement. Maybe it's not time now to draw a brand new system which is suitable for both customs and tax administrations.
Étant donné les différences qui existent entre l'accord sur l'évaluation en douane de l'OMC d'une part et les principes de l'OCDE d'autre part, le moment est peut-être venu d'élaborer un système qui puisse s'appliquer à la fois pour les déclarations douane et les déclarations à l'administration fiscale.
Actually, in 2006 and 2007, we have two joint conference meetings held by OECD and WTO. We invited all experts from tax authorities and customs authorities, as well as the private sectors, to consider the possibility to make some alignment or merge of these two systems. But eventually, we'll find it's not possible, at least for now.
En fait, les conférences ont eu lieu en 2006 et en 2007 entre des experts de l'OMC et de l'OCDE, ainsi que des représentants du secteur privé. L'objectif était de voir s'il serait possible de fusionner les différentes règles de ces deux entités, mais hélas, la conclusion a été que ce n'était pas possible à l'heure actuelle.
So for now time, WCO and OECD, what we can do is first we encourage the cooperation between the customs and the tax administrations to share experience, to exchange informations. And the second is we can draw some case studies which take into consideration of the customer valuation and the OECD guidelines. For example, the case studies for 40.1 I mentioned in my presentation, and we have another case study 40.2, which used a resale price method, which mentioned in the OECD guidelines. Through these cases, we can. Sorry, interpreter. Please.
Thank you. Alors, pour l'instant, la situation est la suivante. Il s'agit d'essayer de favoriser l'échange d'informations entre les responsables dans le domaine fiscal et les douanes, et travailler ensemble sur des études de cas. J'ai mentionné une étude, la 14.1. Il y a aussi la 14.2 qui travaille sur la méthode du prix de revient majoré, si l'interprète a bien compris. Et donc, il y a des possibilités de collaboration entre ces deux organisations internationales.
So with this method, we can make good progress gradually, and maybe eventually we can get a new brand new system which is suitable for both customs and tax administrations. Thank you.
Donc, au fur et à mesure, en travaillant sur cette méthode, en l'occurrence, il s'agit d'une méthode de l'OCDE, nous allons ensemble pouvoir faire des progrès et aller plus loin et essayer de résoudre certains problèmes ensemble. Merci.
Thank you very much, Jabin. Merci beaucoup. We still have time for one more question. On a encore du temps pour une dernière question. Suppose that a multinational sells a bundle of a good and a service to an affiliate, for example, a computer plus tech support. How would customs consider this? How would it allocate the overall value of the transaction to the good and the service if it's difficult to separate one from the other?
Nous avons encore un petit peu de temps pour une dernière question. Alors, la voici. Si une multinationale, une entreprise multinationale vend à la fois une marchandise accompagnée d'un service, un ordinateur par exemple accompagné d'un service d'entretien ou autre, comment la douane va-t-elle apprécier la situation? Qu'en est-il de cette transaction? Comment déterminer la valeur des deux éléments?
Yes, for this question, I think we should come back to the Article 1 of the agreement, in which mentioned the customs value should be based on the transaction value, that is the price actually paid or payable for the imported goods.
Je pense que pour répondre à la question, il convient effectivement de faire référence à l'article 1 de l'accord de l'OMC, où il est dit très clairement que la valeur est en fait basée sur la valeur transactionnelle payée pour les marchandises importées.
In practice, maybe sometimes we have the situation of a package deal, which means maybe like in this case, the price paid for the imported goods and the price paid for some kind of service, they are combined together. And paid by the buyer to the seller. So the price actually paid or payable for the goods is not separately distinguished in the invoice or the contract.
Alors, dans la pratique, on rencontre effectivement ce genre de situation où il y a une sorte d'ensemble, un paquet, comme on dit, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a une marchandise accompagnée d'un service et il n'est pas très facile d'établir une distinction claire et de déterminer quelle est la part revenant spécifiquement à la marchandise.
And in this case, there may be some several possibilities. First is whether this service should be included into the custom value of the imported goods under Article 8 as an adjustment.
Alors, dans le cas, il y a plusieurs possibilités. Par exemple, est-ce que le service en question doit être inclus dans la valeur de la marchandise importée au titre de l'article 8? Sorry, I missed the end of the Article 8.
Article 8, so whether this payment for service should be included into the custom value of the imported goods under Article 8 as an adjustment to the PAPP, price actually paid or payable.
Ah, voilà, donc c'était donc en guise d'ajustement en vertu de l'article 8, s'agit-il donc d'avoir cet ajustement concernant la valeur et le prix à payer ou payable?
So if it should be included as an adjustment, there is no need to distinguish this payment of service from the total payment. So it should be, the whole payment should be considered as the custom value of the imported goods.
Si ajustement il y a, on a donc l'ensemble du paiement qui vise la dite marchandise, y compris le service.
So if the price of paid for the service should not be included, then we must make certain whether it's possible to distinguish this payment for service from the total payments, differential this payment from the payment to the price paid for the imported goods. If we could make it with some objective and quantifiable data, then the customer value should be based on the price actually payable for the goods. But if we couldn't separate the price paid for the service from the price paid for the goods, then in this case, we still remember there is a condition to establish the transaction value. That is, price should not be subjected to some consideration which makes the price paid for the price paid for the actual imported goods cannot be established. Then in that case, we cannot use transaction value. We cannot apply Article 1 in this case.
Alors, si le prix du service ne doit pas être inclus, il doit être établi quelle est la différence qui peut être calculée sur base du prix et du service. Tout cela doit reposer sur des données objectives et quantifiables. Et si la valeur transactionnelle ne peut être prise en compte, en fait, pardon, il faut néanmoins, dans la mesure du possible, recourir à l'article 1er de l'accord qui concerne la valeur transactionnelle. Ça, c'est pour le cas où le prix du service est inclus avec la marchandise qui est vendue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jabin, for your excellent presentation and for the very comprehensive response to the questions. Merci beaucoup pour votre excellente présentation et pour les réponses à toutes les questions soumises par le participant. Thank you all. We now will have a break of 1 hour and 15 minutes. Please stay connected on the GoToWebinar platform. Je vous remercie. Nous allons maintenant faire une pause d'1 heure et 15 minutes. Veuillez ne pas vous déconnecter de la plateforme GoToWebinar. We see you in 1 hour and 15 minutes for our next session on the WCO's blended learning approach. Nous nous verrons dans 1 heure et 15 minutes pour notre prochaine session sur l'approche d'apprentissage mixte de learning. À bientôt.
Thank you. Bye-bye.